Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by Robbie Kroger, the founder and executive director of the Origins Foundation. Robbie's vision is to advocate for hunters by promoting sustainable use of wildlife and communicating specifically to non-hunters. Join me as Robbie shares his hunting journey, the underpinnings of his approach at Origins, and the great work Origins is doing around the globe. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And as 2026 approaches, just a reminder for our industry friends that the Articulate Fly offers consulting services. Whether you need help planning for 2026, help figuring out how AI can boost your bottom line, or just need help with some old school blocking and tackling, we would love to hear from you. Check out the link to our consulting page in the show notes. And finally, a shout out to our sponsor, Trout Routes. We all know streams are getting crowded, and chances are you're not the only one at your local access point. Get away from the crowds and busy gravel lots by using Trout Routes Pro with over 350,000 access points mapped across 50,000 trout streams and much more. Trout Routes has all the data you need to help you find angling opportunities that others will overlook. Up your game and download the app today. Use code ARTFLY20, ARTFLY20, all one word, for 20% off of your Trout Routes Pro membership at maps.troutroutes.com. Now, on to our interview. Well, Robbie, welcome to the Articulate Fly.
Marvin, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I know it's been a little bit of a schedule mumble jumble to try and get me to this point, and I appreciate the patience, but here we are.
It's all good. I mean, you were telling me your travel schedule. You're going to be in multiple continents for just a span of about 2 weeks. I know you're traveling. You're probably a million miler on some airline, right?
I'm not a million miler yet because I was in the beginning of our travel. I wasn't very loyal to one airline. I just sort of picked wherever we could go because we had no money, right? So it was like I would get the cheapest ticket, or we would drive everywhere. Really, you talk about a million miler. My truck had 230,000 miles on it, and it was like an 8-year-old truck bought brand new. So we put the miles on the road. But yeah, I think I'm a Delta guy, so Delta's my hub out of Memphis, head into Atlanta that way, and we're certainly loyal now, and every year we're probably diamond medallion by the middle of March. So we travel a lot.
Yeah, well, the important thing is to get those flat seats for all that transatlantic flight, right?
Well, I don't get those. We are not that kind of nonprofit. So I get a nicer seat than the camel class, but that's about it.
Fair enough. Well, before we dive into the Origins Foundation, I wanted to learn a little bit more about what initially drew you to the outdoors.
You know, in South Africa, a boy growing up in South Africa, you know, you love the bush, you love nature, you love seeing all the wildlife. And, you know, kids in America young boys or young girls aspire to be, I'll just call it young boys, aspire to be firefighters and policemen and all that kind of stuff. But so in South Africa, we want to be the same thing, but we also want to be a game ranger. But we want to be that guy that drives people around, drives American tourists around and shows them elephants and shows them lion, and on walks, you know, stops at a certain bush and says, if you chew this leaf, it's going to give you, you know, a numb mouth. So if you've got a toothache, you can chew on this leaf. And so I wanted to be that person. And I became it. I did a little bit of that, but that's where my love of the bush sort of started, and my love of wildlife. I studied it. I fell in love with swamps at 16 years old, and that's what led me down my career. I got a PhD in wetland ecology and aquatic biogeochemistry. But my family just loved the outdoors. My grandfather was a huge hunter, lived everywhere in the world, from Russia to northern China to, you know, his final years in Mozambique. My father, the same, and, you know, he grew up in Germany, spent his time in Mozambique and South Africa, opened a business in Brazil. So it's just, you can see all the things like that you hear from me today is almost like this product of my family up until now.
Yeah, it's really neat, but I want you to expound a little bit because, I mean, you have a very non-conventional background for a hunting advocate. So, I mean, let our listeners know a little bit more about kind of your educational background and then kind of all of the field work you did before you started Blood Origins.
Yeah, so I didn't hunt at all. Okay, so when I was growing up, I grew up in a town called Johannesburg, South Africa, 8.5 million people. We didn't talk about hunting. My friends didn't hunt. I wasn't thinking about hunting. I was the exact audience that I speak to today. Didn't have an opinion about hunting. I knew that my grandfather hunted. I knew that my father had hunted. I'd read stories of theirs. I've seen trophies on the wall like up behind me right now. Those are my grandfather's trophies. But that was it. And so I have an education in environmental conservation biology. I have a BSc, a Bachelor of Science in that. I have an honors in botany. I have a master's in botany. And then I have a PhD at the University of Mississippi in technically in biology, but specializing in wetland ecology and aquatic biogeochemistry. Have been a professor at Mississippi State for 6 years in the Wildlife Fisheries Department. I published over 100 peer-reviewed articles. I was the chief scientist of the BP oil spill that happened, the biggest ecological disaster that's happened on this planet. I was the chief scientist in charge of standing up a restoration framework for the first $1 billion from Texas to Florida. And in that entire time, I was starting to hunt. I was exposed to hunting here in the United States through friends, and it was just this natural sort of occurrence. I started getting better jobs. My resources were a little bit more. And so I started traveling more, and I started traveling more to hunt. And I guess it's just this idea of, I don't know, it just came to me. Like I had two small boys, 5 years old and 3 years old at the time, or 4 years old at the time. And I wanted to take them hunting because I never got to experience that when I was a kid. And I wanted them to see deer hunting, and I wanted them to experience it and experience trapping and all the things. And I could explain to them biologically why we were doing it, but I couldn't explain to them like from my heart why we were doing it. And so I had to learn that. And for some reason, instead of just talking to people and instead of just reading or watching videos, well, actually, the reason I did it was because I couldn't find anything reading. I couldn't find anything in video. So I said, well, I'll just start project, a side project, a hobby, a passion project on understanding the heart of a hunter. And that's what started Blood Origins. And yeah, I would say you're right. It is a very non-conventional. I am not American. I have an accent. I have a PhD. So I have the acumen to defend positions, rhetoric. I'd use science a lot. And yeah, now it's, we've changed the name to the Origins Foundation. Now it's more sustainable use of wildlife, which, 90% of which is hunting. And our voice is the same. Our voice is science-based. Our voice is very reasoned. Our voice is very purposeful. Our voice is very measured. We don't get upset. We don't resort to name calling. And again, we're rooted in essentially the truth and an unbiased look at what we do and how we do it.
Yeah, really interesting. If we back up a little bit, I think it'd be interesting for our listeners to understand, why you had to wait until you came to the United States to have your first hunting experience when you're, kind of in the mecca of big game huntings where you grew up. But also too, what about that first hunt that like really lit the fire for you?
Yeah, so South Africa is a very different wildlife model than the United States. It's actually 180 degrees away from the American model. The American model is a North American wildlife management model, which is a public doctrine. The resources, the wildlife resources belong to the public. In South Africa, it's the opposite. The wildlife resources belong to the private individual. If you've got an enclosure of adequate stature, they call it adequate enclosure, which is high fence or an appropriate low fence, then the animals belong to you. You can do with what you want. So there's no public grounds. There's no real access to public wildlife in South Africa to hunt. So it's not that I was chasing that. It just, number one, wasn't available to me or anybody in South Africa. And two, I just didn't, obviously based on my background, wasn't going to be exploring that. My friends didn't explore it either. So coming to the United States and understanding public land and understanding the freedoms that we have here, the rights that we have here, it was pretty amazing. to know that I could, from where I'm sitting right now, I could drive 30 minutes and in the appropriate season have a loaded weapon walking on ground that belongs to you, Marvin, belongs to me, and actually belongs to the world, because anybody in this world can go and walk on it, which is just an amazing, absolutely just the amazing situation. And so when I started hunting, I didn't start hunting on public ground. A lot of people do. I started with a friend inviting me to go deer hunting, whitetail deer hunting. And it was Mississippi, so it was the classic sort of redneck Mississippi hunting, which was stuck under a tree with a lawn chair. And he said, here's your gun. This is how it operates. I'd obviously got my hunter's education class and I'd done everything I needed to do, had my license. And he said, if something walks by, shoot it. And so I can't say that like I had this sort of romantic, like amazing first hunt, and that's what sort of sold it to me. And that's what I wanted to do. It was just the thing to do. It's the thing that everyone did in Mississippi. It was almost like akin to, as I said, in my group in South Africa, we did things that everyone did there, right? You played sports, you went out, you did all those things. Well, the same group of friends that now I'd established in Mississippi, they hunted. That's what they did. So naturally, I'm going to hunt and I'm going to participate. And that's just how it started. And then it just grew and grew and grew. I can't say that like now my fire is completely like lit, because I guarantee you the next hunt that I do is going to add a log to that fire, because there's things that I've never experienced. I'm still a very, very nascent hunter. So, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. It's kind of funny. So I grew up in Central Virginia, and it was not uncommon for people to skip school the first day of deer season.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, they give it off. In Pennsylvania, first day of deer season is off. School is out.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's how it is in the western part of Virginia. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. And so, so you kind of get that first taste during graduate school. You're progressing in your career, so you get to kind of range about a little bit more as you're hunting. You're having kind of more and more sophisticated experiences, I guess to say. But, do you remember that light bulb moment when you said, hey, I'm going to kind of create this little side thing called the Blood Origins?
No, like it wasn't actually tied to hunting. It was more tied to my boys. It was more tied to like reading my grandfather's stories again. My grandfather was a prolific writer. So I just picked up some of his stories and started reading some more of his stories. And I was watching outdoor television and Sportsman's Channel and all the things that we all watch. And I guess in my mind, I was like, man, I could do that. I could be that creative. Maybe in my brain, I was like, man, I see a niche here that nobody's filling. So why don't I try to fill it, not knowing anything about what I was stepping into? Didn't know anything about, and I still don't, about cinematography or photography, and I leave that to the professionals. I just had an idea, and I had an idea of how I wanted to communicate, and I had an idea of how I wanted it to look. And then I just had to learn everything else, like, what is the distribution strategy when it comes to media? Like, I didn't know. I had to Google that. How do you do Facebook and Instagram, and how do you, all of this stuff. We're still learning, Marmon. We're still learning, even though we started with nothing, and we're over like 450,000 people across all of our platforms right now. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are kind of two things you said that really resonate. One, I fished as a kid, but I came to fly fishing probably in my early 30s because I wanted to have something to do with my boys that would compete with video games and soccer, right?
Yeah.
And so that was part of it. But also, too, I've kind of had the same experience at the Articulate Fly where you're like, well, let's try this. And then, if you're relatively broad, we've put out 1,000 episodes. So,
that's amazing.
Yeah. But I think, to your point, if you're kind of bright and motivated, like this isn't like when we were kids and you were getting stuff in the mail. Like you can literally on $1,000 supercomputer in your pocket, talk to anyone in the world and find out anything that you're interested in. And so there's really no excuse for trying these experiments.
No, it isn't. And honestly, Marvin, like I'm living the epitome of the American dream. Like there's no other country in this world that you could have an idea, brain fart it out, and work hard at it, right? You work bloody hard at your podcast. We work bloody hard at what we do, and just nose to the grindstone every single day. And now it's my full-time job and I travel around the world.
Yeah.
Who else can say that? Who else can build something like that? Only in a place like America, where it's just like, and the fact that we're a nonprofit, a charity now, that's what made it happen. And it's the philanthropic heart of Americans that allows something like that to happen.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I know it's an ever evolving thing. So the challenges never go away. They just get different and bigger, right?
Yeah.
But so you're about 5 years in, can you share maybe like your biggest surprise or one of your biggest challenges as you're kind of building out things to get to the Origins Foundation?
Yeah, I think we do things differently, Marvin. And it's in our industry, probably the same thing in the fly fishing industry. There's a lot of ego in the industry. We have no ego. I could, I just happen to be a face and the voice of the organization. And because we need one, that's it. It could be somebody else. I just happen to have an accent and the acumen. So like, all right, you're the person, you're the face and the voice. But I don't have to be in all of our videos. I can hire other people to be in our videos. We just don't have an ego. And we have an ethos, which is an I am second ethos, which is, if you, Marvin, are doing great work, I'm going to lift you up. I'm going to tell everybody about how good a job you're doing. And I'm going to look at the guy next door to you who's your competitor in your space, and I'm going to lift him up too, because he's doing good stuff. And that's an anomaly. Nobody does that. That's altruistic. I want to be altruistic. We want to have a rising tide that rises all ships. And that's what we are, and that's what we do. And that has been surprising to the industry. And so, because that's surprising to the industry and it's unique, that was the biggest hurdle to climb over. Is that you're not doing this for yourself, or you're not doing this just, it's like, no, we're doing this for the betterment of the community that we're all a part of. And then secondly, to raise money, we had to break the typical marketing model, which was a company A gives you X amount of dollars, and in return, they get Y. Well, before we turned ourselves into a nonprofit, every time I asked for money, they would say, well, we need Y. And I would be like, why would I give you Y? Think about what we're doing. We're changing this narrative and this perception around hunting for the world. It's good for us. It's good for our community. You should believe in me and do that. Well, everybody said no to me. Everybody. Marvin, I didn't get a single dollar in 3.5 years. And because of that, we didn't belong to anybody. And we could say whatever we wanted, and we could talk to whoever we wanted. And so then when we turned ourselves into a charity, now I could go to company A and go, I'm a charity. Would you give us X to help support what we're doing? And you're not getting Y. And they said, yeah, we'll do that. Because we have proven ourselves now, right? We weren't just a fly-by-night. We had proven ourselves. And now it's just standard. Like, people know that. Like, when they give us money, we're going to be thankful. Don't get me wrong. We're going to talk about them. But we're not delivering, like, you have to give us, 4 posts a week or whatever it is. So those are the two things that I think we've sort of upset the apple cart a little bit. But that were a couple of challenges that we had to climb over.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you try to do things a different way, and it's almost like you're speaking a different language, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for obviously your hunting advocacy group, but you focus on non-hunters, and why should non-hunters care about what you do?
Yeah, so we are obviously heavily advocating for hunting. However, we do say that it's not the panacea. Hunting is not the silver bullet to wildlife conservation. It's a very important tool in a toolbox that's very limited, Marvin. If you think about the things that you can do in this world for wildlife conservation, it comes down to like 7 things, one of which is hunting. And so a non-hunter, the general public that we speak to, needs to understand that we're on the same team, we're after the same thing. I think most people in this world the vast majority would, when you ask the question, like, what is your goal? What would you think around wildlife conservation? Is that a good thing or bad thing? I reckon half, not half, the vast majority, 90% or more would say it's good. We want to protect wildlife. We want to support wildlife conservation. We want better wildlife in the future. And we agree. And we just want to educate you about this tool that has a bad rap around it, has bad PR around it, is malaligned to say it's not as bad as everyone portrays it to be. There's a sector of our world that hates what we do because it doesn't fit philosophically with the way their beliefs. And instead of saying, we don't like your activity, but we can still see the benefits that come from it, i.e. wildlife conservation, habitat protection, they choose to try and get rid of the tool. And so that's why we speak to that general public, we speak to that non-hunter and say, hey, that non-hunter, let's just make sure we're clarifying from a definition. That non-hunter is a non-hunter. It's not an anti-hunter. So we just want to sway their decisions towards the more positive side of sustainable use, i.e. hunting.
Got it. And so it's interesting too, because kind of as I was doing research for the interview, I sort of think of the Origins Foundation as a management philosophy and a communication strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think of the management philosophy as sustainable use. And I would really like you to kind of expound on that and like kind of why that management philosophy is kind of the bedrock of what you're doing at the Origins Foundation.
It's the bedrock. And to me, the reason we're focusing so hard on it is because we believe it's the future. It's the future of wildlife conservation in this world. The reason it's the future of wildlife conservation in this world is that the human population on this planet is burgeoning. Yeah, there's certain countries that definitely the human population is starting to trend down, but there's no place in this world that the pressures on habitat and wildlife are not being felt because of humans. And because of that fact, we as humans have a greater responsibility to steward the remaining habitat and wildlife that we can look after, which means sustainable use needs to play a role in making sure that we protect habitat and protect wildlife in the future. Because if wildlife has value to Joe the farmer and an elephant raids his crop every fortnight, and that elephant has no value, what's going to happen to that elephant, Marvin?
It's just going to keep on doing what it's doing.
It's going to get poisoned, or it's going to get chopped, it's hamstring chopped by the local villagers, and they're just going to slaughter it because they're sick and tired of their crops being raided. But what if there was a sustainable use model in that area where that elephant could potentially be hunted by someone and money generated for the community and the village? What has just changed in their mind? The change is a value. So I'm willing to accept some risk and crop damage because I know that elephant's actually doing more for me alive when somebody comes in and hunts it appropriately than nobody hunting it, nobody using it sustainably, and I just hate that animal. So that's the premise, is that sustainable use provides more value. Not all of the value, again, it's not the silver bullet, it's not the panacea. It provides more value to wildlife, which means wildlife will be looked at in a way that will be sustained for our kids and our grandkids one day.
Got it. And then the communication strategy, and we talked, you focus on not anti-hunters, but non-hunters, but your storytelling is a broader arc of the hunting experience, or it focuses on, the human experience, kind of like planning all the way through to the harvest and after the harvest. And that's one, it's very different than most hunting communication strategy, right? Like, if you go to Outdoor Life Network, that's usually not what's going on. But the other thing,
they're speaking to a hunting community.
Yeah.
That's their communication strategy. Their communication strategy, we're talking to hunters. So we're going to show hunts. We're going to show people killing things.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing too is that's also a very different strategy from kind of your professional background. Like that's not that's not the way you generally talk to people about what's going on. And so I was kind of curious how you settled on, let's just call it the persuadable middle, for your communication strategy.
It's not that far different from what I was doing from a science perspective. My science was all management based. So I was using my science to sway politicians and politics and almost the general public to say, and back then I was in the farming space, agricultural farming space, and using wetlands. And so I was using my science to convince others that this is good. Same thing now. I'm using communication strategies, whether it's science, whether it's blog articles, whether it's podcasts, whether it's films, whether it's documentaries, whether it's, commenting on social media as a means to sway opinion on this thing that I think is good.
Yeah, I get that. I guess what I'm saying though is most people generally, they try to kind of preach to the choir as opposed to finding the people whose minds they can change. And that's I wouldn't say it's singularly unique, but most people are not that sophisticated in their advocacy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we are constantly looking at it through a lens that this person that we're into. So a couple of lenses we look at this. When somebody engages us and calls us every name under the sun, they typically are not a non-hunter. They typically are an anti-hunter. And so what the lens that we immediately go to is one of honesty. We are very upfront. Like if they're commenting on a picture that looks terrible, right? Everyone's seen those terrible hunting photos. We got to be honest and go, yeah, you're right. That's a terrible photo. We agree with you. And so you're disarming them immediately. And then secondly, then you say, well, let me just for a second, let's talk about the things that came because of that hunt. Let me talk to you about the village. Let me talk to you about the person. Let me talk to you about the community upliftment that came from that hunt. That individual that I'm engaging with is not going to get his mind changed or her mind changed. Okay? But depending on the account, depending on the situation, there could be 50,000 to 100,000 people that read what I wrote. Most of them are non-hunters or hunters. And so for the non-hunters, we have just put ourselves in front of them because, again, you can't believe the voyeurism in this world when it comes to social media. There are lots of people that don't engage. They don't like things. They don't comment things. But they want to read. They want to be in the know. The FOMO is big, right? So I want to be involved. I want to know. Well, they're seeing me do a couple of things. They're getting information out of my comment. They're seeing a character of a hunter interacting with an anti-hunter, keeping his cool, keeping his character, keeping respectful, all of those things. And then the hunting community that's watching me is looking at it going, oh, I want to interact like him. So it's almost like a little peer pressure system that we're building. And I see it we've been going now, as a nonprofit for 5 years. I see posts where I get tagged into things. We get tagged into things that sounds like us, but it's not us writing it. So there's definitely a sort of a pervasiveness that's happening in how people engage, which is huge. It's very, very, very important in how you engage online because it shows, it's a broader look at what the community's character is like.
Yeah, it's interesting too because, I know this is your criticism of social media. The harvest, whether you're hunting or fishing, is such a little part of the entire experience, right? Like even for me, like I do a little bit of upland bird hunting and, I don't really care about the birds. I love just watching the dogs work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because they're just so happy and they want to make the people that are on the hunt. So, they want to be, good servants basically. And they're so enthusiastic. Like to me, that's like, if you get to go out on a brisk day and walk around with a shotgun and watch the dogs go, that's an amazing day.
Amazing day. Yeah. So the reason why, I rack my brain all the time, like, why are we as a hunting community not talking more about the things that I want them to talk about? And the reason is because they're communicating to their peers, their community. They're communicating to hunters. And the way that hunters communicate with one another, just like fishermen, how do fishermen communicate with each other, Marvin? They send pictures of their fish.
Yep.
That's it.
Size and number, right?
That's it. Same thing with hunters. And so back in the day, before social media, before the advent of social media, that's what you did. You sent photos in the mail. You put your photo up in the local outdoor shop, right? You had that pin board. Same thing with fish. Everyone checked it out. Why? Because the people that were going into those stores were your people. Now, think of those little things, those outdoor shops as greenhouses. Those greenhouses now exist in this world of social media. They still exist. You still share your pictures, right? But now they're on devices, and the world is looking through the glass of the greenhouse and seeing everything that you're sharing. And they're like, we don't like that greenhouse. Look at the stuff that's happening in that greenhouse. It's not anonymous anymore. It's not just tied to our community anymore. It's out for the world to see. And so we have to change some of the imagery. We have to change some of the things that we talk about. And it's difficult because the community upliftment, the person you just employed, the schools, the medical, the meat distribution, the sunsets, the camaraderie, the fire, that's all not very sexy communication to our peers. So we don't naturally do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And from my perspective, that's all the most important stuff to talk about, right?
Yeah, but I'd even challenge you. Like, if you do hunt and you do all those things, how many times have you spoken about it?
I talk about it, but I also too, I generally don't share like fishing and hunting pictures, right? Like I was just up in Pennsylvania, I just shared a cover bridge picture. My theory on that
Nice.
is not that I've got any great communication strategy. My theory is that I have enough pictures of me holding fish, and that they're plenty for my kids. And when I can't remember anymore, it doesn't matter. So I don't need to take the time and do all that sort of stuff. And so I generally just try to kind of stay out in the moment. So it's no great, insight on my part. Although I will say, you generally now with Instagram carousel, you can have some really nice kind of storytelling
Yeah,
montages if you're deliberate about
yeah,
collecting the pictures. But it's interesting too, right? Because your management philosophy, I think I remember doing research for the interview that, you were pointing out how incredibly complicated the wolf management issue is out in the Rockies, right? And you
hmm
have,
hmm
it's not just a hunting, not hunting, one of 7 management tools, but also you have, an incredibly broad cross section of interests, right? Ranchers, BLM managers, and to say that we live in polarized times is pretty much an understatement. How do you kind of keep the fortitude to have this nuanced approach for sustainable use and communication in the onslaught of this, like, it's either good or bad. There's nothing in the middle. There's never any gray. Because I think that's a really challenging place to be as a communicator today.
Yeah, it is. But I think I think in any issue, and we'll use the wolf as an example, I think in any issue, there's enough data and logic to show that, hey, where I live, that isn't the shoot, shovel, and shut up of wolves, and the other opposite side, which is never shoot a wolf ever. You sit in the middle and you go, I think you're wrong, and I think you're wrong. And so if both sides are pissed off at me, now I've actually found the place where I need to be. So let's just talk through it with wolves. I like wolves. So that means I'm on this side. I like them on the landscape, which means I'm on this side. But I also believe that states have to have the ability to manage wolves, which means I'm on this side now. I think that you look at the data and the science of wolf reintroductions and wolf repopulations across the West, as well as in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, those objectives have far been exceeded in terms of recovery objectives from Fish and Wildlife Service, which means they do not need protections anymore, which puts me on this side again. But I'll also say that I believe that because of all the policies that we have, all the regulations that we have, the ESA and all the things that come at a state and federal level, that we will never go back to wolves being extirpated from the landscape, which sits me very much now in the middle. And they say, well, how do you know, Robbie? There's an example. Look at Idaho. Idaho has 1,200 wolves. They have every single technique under the sun to manage those wolves. They take 400 a year, yet the population of wolves maintains at 1,200 every single year. And so I think there's heavy emotions on both sides. I think sometimes I look towards more of our side and say, man, this shoot, shovel, shut up rhetoric is not good for us. Like every time you say that, that's sort of like a dart that I have to pull out of our skin, because this side is saying, see, look at you guys. You guys don't care. But I think that there's more and more of me in the digital media landscape than there was. And I think that sentiment is growing and growing. Look at the ranches in Colorado. The ranches in Colorado, before the wolf reintroduction happened, were totally against wolves being on the landscape. Well, wolves are on the landscape now. Are they still in the shoot, shut up, and shovel model? No. They are, okay, we have to deal with this. How do we deal with this? We need to have, we're trying, we're doing our best here, but we also need the opportunity and the ability for lethal management. Because it's going to get to a point where it's like, we've tried everything. Help us. Like, we need help. And that help could be pay us. We've lost 50 cows. Pay us $500,000. We'll live with the wolves, same as the elephant example, Marvin. So there's obviously very, very, very divisive topics, but we approach it every topic the same way that I've just described it to you. Wild horses, hugely divisive topic. Maybe the one I don't approach the way that I just described is feral cats. I think feral cats are just terrible on the landscape from a biodiversity perspective. Luckily, we don't have a big issue here in the States, but Australia, like, it's decimating. It is the number one decimator of biodiversity in Australia.
Yeah, interesting. Do you ever worry about, hunters that don't share the values you're trying to espouse of the Origins Foundation, kind of riding your coattails and kind of using you as kind of a useful mouthpiece, but not, kind of standing behind the values that you want to embody?
It's a good question. I don't think we've ever experienced that yet. The people that will be with us are our kind of people. But the people that do say, that's hypothetically, somebody goes, yeah, we're with you, and then do something unethical. We're getting to points in our community that people are starting to say things. And in that scenario, if I knew the person, I'd be like, dude, you've got to say something. Like, that's even worse when you're unethical and don't say anything, or like, nope, it's fine, when you know it isn't. So I think also a sign of maturity and a sign of character is, yep, I messed up. Like, that was wrong. And sort of just, put a flag in the ground. Yeah, you are bringing up a great point, and we are very cognizant of, we have an image, we have a character, we have a thing that is what we do and how we do it. And if somebody like, oh, that's me, I do that, and then they go and do something counter to that, as long as they're not, one of my board members affiliated with me, hired by me, I think there's enough gap there to say, Okay, you said you believed, but did you really?
Yeah, whether it's over commercialized, and I mean that in the sense of like not embodying kind of fair chase in the process or things like that, I could see, times to basically say, hey, this isn't how we do this, right?
Yeah, there are things that they're very clear, like, that's not us. Fair chase, even though defined by Boone and Crockett, fair chase is a very gray, slippery slope in multiple directions. In those kinds of situations, we prefer to talk them out to try and understand. So, for instance, somebody would say, I think Boone and Crockett even has it in their definition, you have to be within the radius of the animal's like purview for it to be fair chase. So what does that actually mean? It's a very gray area. So for a white-tailed deer, does that mean I have to be within 50 yards of that deer before I kill it? So what happens if I shoot it at 300 yards? Did I just exhibit non-fair chase principles in what I just did? So we will always have that thought process. We'll always talk it out. We'll always ask big questions because I want people to think about it, right? I want people to really question. If you're saying someone's unethical because they shoot game at 500 yards because they're a long-range rifle shooter, why is that unethical in your mind? I want to understand. I need to understand why you stand where you stand. Oh, because the animal doesn't know you're there. Okay, so what if they went to 320? What's that number? And how do you know it's that number? Has science proved that deer can only see this far or they can only smell this far? And what if I did a really good job and got, upwind? And there's just lots of questions in that scenario. We'll always talk it through, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like you have to kind of come back and ask yourself if the way you're pursuing the animal is plugging into that broader story arc that you kind of philosophically agree is kind of, for lack of a better words, the hunt, right? But yeah, I mean, it's a complicated thing, but we have that in fishing too, where you'll see people, whether it's an etiquette issue or I mean, people don't read anymore, right? So God forbid you would actually know what the fishing regulations were, and that whole way of like, how do you talk to people on the river in a way that's constructive, right? That's not, or even like younger kids, right? They're on the river, they just don't know, right? And you have an opportunity there to help them and not educate them in some really kind of nasty hierarchical way, but you give them an experience that makes them appreciate the sport more and actually want to fish more, kind of, I guess, in consistent with the norms, right?
Yeah, it's, you hope that youngsters are learning from their elders or others that have decided to mentor them. And my job is to help, I guess, mentor those mentors, right? Is help like, I want you to think about these kinds of things. I want you to think about how you interact with people. I want you to think about character and your interactions and respect and things like that.
Yeah, well, we're going to go to the lighter side now. We're going to talk about the fun stuff, right? So why don't you tell us about some of your kind of recent and upcoming documentaries and conservation projects? Because you got some really cool stuff that's, I don't know what's in the pipeline, but I see what's on the website. And you got some really neat stuff. You want to share that with our listeners?
Yeah, we've got some, we work all over the world. We've got, I'll tell you a couple of things. We're working on, obviously, the world's largest cheetah relocation project right now. We moved 17 cheetah. We've got another 3 permits in place. Not in place yet, but we're probably going to move another 3 cheetah in 2026. And that's just a fun project. It's tickling the science side of me. I geek out every morning. Our cheetahs have satellite collars on them, so I can see their movements every day. I can think about like why they're moving, what are they doing here, why do they split? Please don't go across to that area. We don't want you to be in the human habitation. But then at the same time, we're like, you're going to have to learn. Like, don't go in that area. So that's cool. That's at least a 5-year project. We're at the end of year 1 right now. We have a documentary coming out in June of next year. It'll debut in Paris, France, called Sauvons Bambi. And Savon Bambi is about the original narrative that sort of started an anti-hunting rhetoric, which was Bambi. And a lot of people don't realize that the deer in Bambi is actually a roe deer. It's a very common species of deer across Europe. And roe deer babies, baby fawns, have spots on them, and they get hidden in hay fields between the middle of May and the middle of June. They're typically born in that time frame. And so mom hides them in the fields. Well, it's also the same time frame based on weather conditions that farmers cut their fields for the very first time. And so they chop Bambi up. And so the only people that actually care in this scenario are hunters and hunting organizations. And so these guys go out every morning with thermal drones and they find baby roe deer and they pick them out of the fields and move them. And the guys come in and the farmers cut the fields. There's no PETA, there's no Humane Society, there's no NSPCA doing any of this work. And so that's a cool documentary that we've got. We've got another really, really emotional documentary called In My Footsteps that's coming out in 2026. In My Footsteps, about an individual who received the first education monies from a hunting charity in South Africa. And because he was number one, he had to be successful. If he wasn't successful, then the program would have collapsed, because what's the point in investing in kids if nothing's coming to fruition? Well, this individual is now a very accomplished architect in a very accomplished architectural firm in East London, in Port Elizabeth, sorry. And we went and told his story, and then we took him back to where he started and made him walk the same streets that he walked as a kid and the hostels that he stayed in. And it is a powerful, powerful piece. We got a veteran turkey hunt coming. That's, again, a very powerful piece about how healing helps these veterans, how being in the outdoors helps them. We got work on rhino trade. We've got a lion conservation piece. We're investing in building schools and clinics in South Africa and Zambia next year. We've got a lot on the go, Marvin. A lot on the go.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, too, about the cheetah relocation is that you're not relocating them to then harvest them later. You're relocating
no
them.
hunting.
Yeah, so
no hunting.
There's no hunting, there's no harvest there. You're actually moving them because the species is incredibly endangered.
Yeah, incredibly endangered, requires new habitats, requires open range systems to be repatriated into. And truly, it's a range expansion project. You want cheetahs to be in broader habitats. And we know that there's a couple of transient cheetahs in this system, not very many. And we probably think there's probably 6 to 10 in the area based on all of the anecdotal information that we've gathered. And now we've put 17 into the system. And we plan to put more into the system. And the system really, our area is a 500,000 acre area just on the border in Mozambique, on the border of Zimbabwe. But it buffers up against probably 10 million acres of adequate cheetah habitat. That's all protected, whether there's some hunting concessions, there's some photographic concessions, there's some national parks. So it's a really beautiful blend of all of the, as we mentioned in the beginning, all of the uses, all the tools for wildlife conservation in this landscape.
Yeah, very neat. And so as I kind of come back, right, so I'm a fisherman first, and we have similar issues. There's a little bit of difference, so we've got like wild fish hatchery. There's a lot, particularly on the saltwater side, like with striper and redfish, there's a lot of commercial recreational divide, and, we've got the public-private issue and kind of catch and release versus harvest, but all that stuff kind of goes in the soup. And I was kind of curious, your thoughts on how we, the fishing and the fly fishing community, could use your approach to kind of open the aperture to get better solutions, right? Because it's not, there's some places that have to be private to be protected. There's some places where you have to harvest fish. People have to make a living. So like, how do you moderate commercial versus recreational harvest? Kind of any thoughts about, how people can apply what you've learned and you're implementing on the hunting side to their fishing communities?
I think we've already sort of worked through that, which is we need to get away from just sending and talking about the number of fish you've caught and how big the fish is, to really taking the idea of all those things by the scruff of its neck and saying, yeah, Like, make it public. Like, this is what happens. Like, this is why it's private. Anybody know why it's private? Has anybody talked about why it's private? Why it needs to be private? Here, let's talk about it. Let's have a podcast about it. Let's have a field day about it. Let's have a documentary about it. Let's build some infographics that show the changes in biodiversity as a result of that effort. Hey, let's talk about the economic upliftment that comes because of this. Hey, let's give you the data of the fishery and how well it's doing because we did X, Y, and Z. And that's why we need X, Y, and Z implemented in elsewhere, because the same thing's going to happen. And I'm sure CCA is doing stuff like that. And I'm sure there's other organizations, Trout Unlimited, doing things like that, but maybe not at the scale of what's needed like we're doing. And so it just takes a different mindset, Marvin. That's all it's going to require, is somebody approaching it from the mindset like we do, which is, we're not actually interested in the fishing, but we're in your camp, we're in your community. Like I'm not interested in the hunting. I'm interested in all the things that come as a result of you doing what you're doing. And how do we take all of that information to defend why you do what you do and help you keep what you do, protect what you do, grow what you do?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're going to have to fight a similar battle on the social media front, because I don't think that, for lack of a better word, the influencer culture we have going on in the fly fishing community is really lending itself very well to that richer narrative.
But they could.
They could.
They're primed too.
Yeah. well, something on the list for 2026.
There we go.
So to sort of come full circle, you had this great public land experience as your first hunting experience in the U.S. And, obviously there's a lot going on in terms of access, public land access in the United States. But also too, I think there's a lot going on in terms of funding the infrastructure to manage the public land. And so I was kind of curious if you kind of had some thoughts. I think it would be great, given what you do, but also the fact that you kind of have this benefit of knowing like what it's like to grow up, for lack of a better word. I know you were in South Africa, but that's kind of the European model, like the king owns the land and you don't get to go on the land. But kind of share your thoughts about where we are in terms of managing public lands and funding the stewards that we pay to basically make sure we, sustainably basically reap the benefits of those lands.
Yeah, as I said, the public land system in America is what makes it amazing, what makes it great. I think obviously we've seen under this administration a constant attack on public lands and changing potential uses of public lands. And again, you'd expect this from me. I sort of get it, which is this whole energy independence component of the strategy. Like, hey, let's take care of our own. We've got things here, but we shouldn't sacrifice what we have the greatest riches in, which is public land and the ability to access public land, all the benefits that come from it, spiritual, physical, mental, feeding yourself, that kind of things. I do, though, believe that we have forgotten about the management. We've forgotten about the stewardship component of our public lands. The agencies that are in charge of our public lands, USDA, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, those agencies are severely underfunded to do the work to maintain these areas, right? You just look at catastrophic fires. That's just the reason we have catastrophic fires, is because we just don't have the money and infrastructure to implement a fire regime that is from a management lens. That's it. So if we gave them more money, we'd have better public lands, we'd have better wildlife, we'd have better resources. To me, it's a huge thing. The management element is huge. Like, think outside the box. Let's think really outside the box a little bit. We can think a little bit of the public-private partnership. The public-private partnership works very, very well all over the world. Are there small wildlife refuges, that are duck refuges that an NGO, local NGO can take over the management of? And they co-manage with the feds and the private entity. It happens everywhere. We shouldn't be afraid of that model. We should embrace it, because now you've got access to money. and people who are interested in doing the work. So there's, carbon credits, biodiversity credit schemes, tapping into the world banks, tapping into big companies that need those biodiversity credits or carbon credits. Could we not, again, create a public-private partnership there to help our public lands get better, become healthier? That's where I stand.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I'm always so disappointed that the framing now is so simplistic, right? It's either A or not A, and there's like I always tell my boys, like all the hard work is in the middle, all of it. Like, and so, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, I think. And, I think it's kind of, where we are now is, some people are scared to death. They want responsible management, but things are being so aggressively moved in the other direction that they're becoming maybe overly protective and not as thoughtful as they could be. But I think it's a super complicated issue. I rarely, fish on private land, right? Get to go out west, right? You just buy your out-of-state fishing license in Montana. You can go all over creation. It's an amazing thing, as we kind of wind down. I know you're not speaking because you're going to be hunting for the next 3 or 4 weeks.
No, I'm not hunting.
Oh,
I'm business. It's all, so this time of the year in South Africa and in the Southern Hemisphere are all the annual general meetings of all the professional hunting associations. That's why every year I miss Thanksgiving, because the Professional Hunting Association meetings of South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Zambia all happen almost like in a 3-week back-to-back. So, I wish I was hunting.
Yeah, well, so you're not hunting. So, obviously none of my listeners will be able to join you in South Africa for any of those. But, as we kind of look, in the fly fishing world, the wintertime is a big show season for consumer and B2B shows. Or do you have any speaking engagements in the States or any trade shows? I know you like to go to those as well. Anything like that you want to alert folks to, where they maybe get to kind of come out and talk to you about this stuff a little bit more, shake your hand, all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, we're at all of the shows. Like, you name it, we're at it. Small chapter shows, to the Wild Sheep Foundation, to Dallas Safari Club, to Safari Club International, to NWTF. We're pretty much 90% of them. So you will see on our socials when we're moving and how we're moving around this world. And, if we're in your area, if you're in your neck of the woods, we'd love to have a coffee with you. We'd love to shake your hand. I just had this experience in Australia. I was doing a road trip through Australia, and I just put on my social, like, this is my route today. Anybody on my route, have a pie or a coffee together. And I had multiple people that I stopped on the side of the road. And they had bought the coffee already, and we stopped and we had a coffee together and chatted and took a selfie, and off I went.
Yeah, it's kind of cool too when that happens, because it kind of tells you that all that hard work of the last 5 years, you're not crazy, right? That you're actually reaching people.
Marvin, we were halfway around the world.
Yeah.
And that happened, which blew my mind.
Yeah. Which again, as I always say, folks, you got $1,000 supercomputer in your pocket. Don't look at cat memes on Instagram. Go reach out and connect with people, right?
That's right.
Well,
That's right.
Before I let you go, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
No, I would just encourage everyone, if you are in the hunting space or even if you're in the fly fishing space, think about those things that sort of made you become a fisherman or love fly fishing or love hunting, and, talk about them. Talk about them on your social media, on the digital media. Learn about them. Learn about your why. Learn about the upliftment that comes as a result of the activities that you love to do, because you never know when you're going to be in a situation where you have to defend it. It may be a dinner party. It may be your mother-in-law. It may be Thanksgiving dinner. It may be on social media. And if you've educated yourself enough and you've watched videos, if you listen to people, you'll be confident enough to make your point and understand why you're making your point. And I think that'll go a long way in our community. I'm seeing it happen every single day. So I would challenge people. And if you feel like you have a question, you're like, man, I just don't quite understand this from a hunting perspective, we are not hard to find. You can find us on all the social media platforms. You can direct message us on all the social media platforms. 90% of the time, you're going to be talking directly to me. So I like that personal interaction. I'm not going to give up that personal interaction. So yeah, reach out.
Very neat. And so if folks want to learn more about the Origins Foundation, support your work and kind of follow your adventures in the field, where should they go?
Just type in the Origins Foundation into every platform. Will come up. Google, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. You'll find us.
Well, I will drop all that stuff in the show notes, folks, so it'll be a whole lot easier for you to find those links.
Well, I appreciate that, Marvin. Really do.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you carving some time out before your multi-week conference expedition to South Africa.
Yeah, I'm one of those procrastinators. My wife said to me this morning, she said, "Have you packed?" I said, "I haven't even started."
That's because you're a seasoned traveler.
3.5 weeks of traveling. Packing is going to happen in the next 2 hours.
Well, thank you so much for making the time. Safe travels.
Appreciate you, Martin. Thank you.
Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed the interview as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Remember, links to all of this episode's sponsors are in the show notes. Check them out. Tight lines, everybody.